merging the Comptroller and the Treasurer's office, and Mike Madigan makes himself scarce at the state fair. We talk about it next on Capitol View. Welcome to Capitol View, the weekly program on state politics and government and how it might just affect you. Joining me this week on Capitol View is Mark Maxwell, Capitol Bureau Chief for WCIA Television. Welcome, Mark.
Bruce, thanks for having me.
Yeah. And also Hannah Meisel, journalist extraordinaire for the Daily Line based in Springfield. Welcome, Hannah.
Glad to be here.
Great. This week, the fair is ongoing. It was Democrat Day at the State Fair. Unfortunately, Joe Biden, or fortunately, depending on how you might feel about him, fell ill and was not able to make it to Springfield, which perhaps might have put maybe just a little bit more spotlight on the fair than the Crown Plaza Hotel, where Mr. Biden had been scheduled to make his appearance before he fell ill. You were out at the State Fair, Hannah, and one thing that came about was a remarkable lack of folks, schmoozing with the Speaker of the House. So you had asked a question of the Attorney General candidate, Democrat Kwame Raoul. What was the question and what did he say?
So after Mike Madigan, he got started yesterday on Thursday morning with some remarks, and then he left forthwith.
This being Mr. Madigan?
Yes.
How long do you think he spent at the fair in public?
In public? I don't know, like 10 minutes maybe.
10 minutes. And this was Democrat Day.
It was Democrat Day.
Okay.
And he, in his remarks, he said, Democrats have to stay united. The party that stays united wins. Anyway, then he left. And then, a couple hours later when we had a press gaggle, because Republicans have made Mike Madigan a dirty word, basically, they've really succeeded at making sure that everyone in the state knows his name. When before, maybe you've heard of him, maybe not. You certainly weren't aware of all of his power. You're the average voter. Anyway, so we asked various candidates, where they stood on the Madigan issue, blah, blah, blah. I asked Kwame Raoul specifically, Mike Madigan left. Lisa Madigan wasn't even here. She sent a video message. Is it wise for them to stay away? Are they a liability to the party? And he said, and I quote, "My name is Kwame Raoul. Next question." He did not want to engage.
Okay.
And Mark, you have an interesting theory on this.
We were talking a little bit earlier, and that statement to me rang of one of independence and I'm my own man, and how dare you. To the Republican Party, he's responding and saying, how dare you say that I'm just somebody else's puppet? I can think for myself, act for myself, and no one party should be squeezed into the mindset of just one man, and that it can have a lot of different various ideas. And in fact, during the primary, Kwame Raoul had a lot of backing from very progressive liberal Democrats who stand very staunchly opposed to Mike Madigan. And he wears that as a badge of honor. And so I think that he doesn't like being second fiddle or playing second fiddle to Mike Madigan any less than anybody else. We saw more nuanced or maybe more friendly answers from people like Christian Mitchell, the interim chair of the Democratic Party, but who basically are that the party itself is reluctant to give Republicans carte blanche control of the script and say we have to answer every question you throw at us. We have a set of ideas and principles we want to stand for, and we'd rather not reduce it to a personality. That's kind of the best answer they've been able to use to thwart or block this Madigan question and move on. But that also does conveniently ignore the Speaker's vice grip on power in Springfield in the way things actually work after elections are over. That's going to be interesting starting in January of 2019, how the Speaker's role is. Does he see himself in the twilight of his career handing off the baton to a J.B. Pritzker, or does he see himself still asserting the power that he has for so many decades?
Well, but with regard to 10 minutes, that's not very long, and Madigan has been known, or is at least perceived, as not being a big state fair guy. Some folks like fairs, some folks don't. He's never been perceived as Jim Edgar, for example, who really was infamous for really liking the fair. Do you think that he made such a brief appearance because he doesn't like the fair, or because it was a strategic sort of thing? Because you see something like the infamous Judy Bartopinka doing the polka with George Ryan. I believe that's the money shot for the trackers, if they can catch somebody being buddy cozy with the speaker. So what do you think it is, or is it something else, or
Could be
a little bit of both?
Could be a combination of both. I frankly think that this is a person who everyone refers to him as this brilliant strategist. He knows how to pick his battles, and he's not necessarily one drawn to the spotlight. He knows that when he's not answering questions or asking questions that he's winning. Usually that's been his mantra, and so he stays out of the spotlight and lets the candidates who are actually on the statewide ballot in a few months have the spotlight. I think he thinks that's appropriate.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of a spotlight, it's not perhaps the brightest spotlight in the world, but there's been talk now in the both the Comptroller and the Treasurer's race about an age-old question. Do we need both the Comptroller's office and the Treasurer's office? It seems like 3 of the 4 candidates are thinking, well, maybe some sort of a merge or some sort of a shake-up, for lack of a better word, is needed in the structure here. Susana Mendoza seems to be taking the tact of things are pretty much how I think they should be. Is this just an issue that's going to get resurrected every time we have an election for Comptroller Treasurer? Does this have any legs?
I think it is an issue that it's kind of low-hanging fruit, just like another age-old question: should we get rid of the office of the lieutenant governor? Although we're not talking about that this year, mysteriously. But I think when you have a 30,000-foot view of how state government works, people will say it makes sense to combine these offices. They both deal with money, but they deal with money in very different ways. Sure. Could they be combined? I'm sure. Yeah, I'm sure. But and the Republicans, for sure, who are running, it's former state rep Darlene Singer, she's now currently or formerly in the Browner administration.
She's danced around in various capacities.
Okay, yeah. She's running for comptroller as a Republican, and then Jim Dodge, he's a newcomer, running for treasurer. They have made like a pact together. They are joining hands and say, when we both get elected, which is a long shot. I mean, they are not very well known, not polling extremely well. Anyway, but they say, when we get elected, we promise to combine our offices. Treasurer Mike Frericks, Democrat, who's already served one term, he's signaled that he would be a little bit more open to it. Yeah. But when asked yesterday, Comptroller Susana Mendoza, she really felt like it was just a side issue, that it was, not really worth talking about. Yeah. And these, like we said, like the 2 offices are they're very different. Comptroller is responsible for paying the state's bills, while the Treasurer's office is mainly responsible for state investments.
But if you were to pose that question in the form of a quiz to every voting citizen in Illinois, I wonder how many of them would be able to really accurately define the functions of each of those offices.
How many of them even know we have a Comptroller's office, a Treasurer's office?
How many of them know how to spell it? And right. It's not that people aren't are disinterested. It's that people have demanding jobs and lives and things to go about. And sure. I will admit, just as a personal experience, that getting closer to state government, when I got here, you start to learn a lot more about it takes a long time. You have to really take a long time to get to know the different agencies and what they do. Yeah. And the Treasurer's office and the Comptroller's office, people make that simplistic distinction. They say, oh, they both deal with money? Sure, let's merge them.
Sounds good.
That's easy. Yeah. But the truth is, each of them they don't have a lot of redundant or overlapping employees that do the same task. The state law requires one office to do this thing, the other to do that thing. They use right now different computer systems. I suppose some technology could be brought to merge that and make that process more efficient. But the proposal or the plan, the campaign promise to save the state $13 or $14 million, which is a lot of money, but also a drop in the bucket compared to the budget. That promise is built on, at the very least, fuzzy math and probably just not really well thought out strategy on how they would actually do that, because they'd have to break the law to just fire half of the people, because then the state is no longer performing the tasks that the law requires it to do.
Well, not just the law, the Constitution as well. I mean,
Right.
you'd have to go and rejigger that. You know, I think the argument could be made, it would be easier or perhaps more appropriate to say, why don't we just get rid of the treasurer, because the comptroller has probably more duties than the treasurer does. And it's interesting when you look at the list of treasurers that Illinois has had over the years. We've had 71, I think, at this point in time.
74, right?
74, something like and
Who's counting?
Yeah, well, but who's counting? You had Judy Bartopinka, who held the office, I think, for multiple terms, but before her, you got to go back to the early 70s, late 60s, before you found somebody who, treasurer rhymes with springboard for higher office. You know, certainly that was the attempt by...
A few of them became governor.
A few of them did, but you have, you know, also have Alexi Janelius, one-termer who failed at his...
Pat Quinn?
Well, you have Pat Quinn who succeeded. So, I mean... So if the major accomplishment of our past governors is winning higher office, you know, why not just eliminate the treasurer's office?
It's an interesting question. They hold a lot of investment. The answer that Comptroller Mendoza, who doesn't hold the treasurer's office, by the way,
Correct.
she has no desire in keeping it or acquiring it. She's the one who says, no, that power should not be vested in my office, because in the 1950s, a guy named Orville Hodge went to jail because he was the one guy overseeing both of those, what became both of those agencies. They didn't exist back then in their current form, but he was convicted of corruption, fraud. He had too much power in one place. So they said, let's take the lockbox and the piggy bank and split it into two. This one writes the checks, this one makes the investments, and we don't want people borrowing from this to do that. Funny though, in the last General Assembly, lawmakers said, what if we just rewrite that law and say we can take some of that money that we have invested to pay down our bills?
Yeah.
But
Sure.
there's a firewall there, and it exists for ethical reasons. And I think it's important people understand that before they just buy into or agree with or go along with a simplistic idea that may well be worth it, but it's important that we understand at least the facts before we start wrestling
yeah.
with this.
So yeah, this is campaign season. Who has time for
Who has time for facts?
nuanced
Yeah,
facts?
Capital
we need
View
more
viewers,
fake
of course.
news.
Well, of course.
Well, you know, but if you look at Mendoza's big argument, you're right, has been look at what Orville Hodge did, and then also the comptroller
Rita
and Dixon,
Crenwell, yeah.
Rita Credwell. If you take the Hodge thing, he stole $6 million in 1950s. That would be $56 million today. Take either figure, divide it. Hey, you know, it's cheaper to put up with, you know, an embezzlement every 50 years or so than it is to fund this office. I mean, and nobody would really, you know.
That may be a more nihilistic view than what Comptroller Mendoza would take. What's also interesting to me, and I just can't shake this fact, it tickles me a little bit, but if they were to do this, I've asked both sides. I've asked Treasurer Frericks and I've asked Jim Dodge and Darlene Sanger together at the State Fair just this week. So which of you becomes in charge? And they said, well, we'd have to face off in an election. So they would literally...
Not a coin flip.
No coin flip, and they haven't deferred. They haven't said, well, if I win, the other should get it.
Yeah.
No, they said we'll have to go off head-to-head and win whatever new constitutional office they invent.
What should we call it? I mean, comptroller and treasurer have been taken.
The
The
Comptreasurer.
Comptreasurer.
Comptreasurer, yeah.
That was well done.
That would be awesome. Has a little zing to it. I like it. Well, speaking of campaigns, because we are in the season.
That was not rehearsed. I just had to point that out.
No.
Yeah, that was
That was authentic.
Yeah, absolutely authentic.
Organic.
There you go.
Organic, yeah. Well, we can talk about carp later, but that's an inside joke.
Anyway.
Mark, you had a story the other day about a tracker incident here in Springfield involving the candidate for the 13th District congressional seat, Betsy Lonergan. For those who haven't heard, fill us in on what happened. And
Sure. Well, let's set the table first. It was the night of Wednesday of this week, which was Governor's Day. The next day was Democrat Day. And Democrats had 3,000 people in town. Republicans had their own throngs so politicians from across every corner of the state all converged.
It sounds like the OK Corral.
And in some ways it was, and they're all here in Springfield. And people that know Springfield well know that the downtown is what, 6 square blocks, a few bars and taverns, and a lot of almost every bar had a fundraiser in it at one place or another. And so you have Governor Rauner on Wednesday saying, "Our home, our fight." That's his theme. And you have the next day J.B. Pritzker taking to the mic, actually that night at the AFL-CIO, saying, "Are you ready for the fight?" And I don't think either of them envisioned that it would become an actual physical altercation But a field director who worked for Congressman Rodney Davis, the Republican incumbent in the 13th district, barged into his Democratic opponent's fundraiser, which was at J.P. Kelly's, a well-known bar in Springfield. She's having a polite fundraiser there. By all accounts, it was just going pretty easy. She's kind of working the room, talking to people, and the goal is to raise money so she can beat Rodney Davis in November. The backdrop of that race, he doesn't hold open town halls to the public because he cites hooligans who are opposed to me politically who might come in and try to disrupt or upstage my event. Therefore, I won't go out to the public. I'll hold private office hours. So that's the whole backdrop. Levi Lovell is a paid campaign staffer, barges in, and a police officer who was off duty, but who was in the room, observed his behavior and said he looked to be drunk. The Springfield police said they could smell liquor on his breath. If that wasn't enough to convince you, he was holding a cocktail in this hand and a cell phone in this one. And he was chasing Betsy Dirksen.
He was multitasking.
Yeah, some people pointed out like he didn't even spill his drink, which was maybe the most impressive thing. But so he was chasing. This is very a packed room, and I wish we could show a clip. He was chasing Betsy Dirksen Londrigan around the room, and you could hear her. You know, she's frightened. She's startled. She doesn't know who this guy is.
Sure.
He's 6 inches from her face and saying, "What are we going to do about ICE? What are we going to do with Trump? Are you going to impeach Trump? Are you going to repeal the Second Amendment?" And he's just peppering her with all of these sort of conservative talking points, but some of them were questions about, specific to the race, but some of them were just a hostile, menacing tone.
He was acting somewhat like a journalist on his better questions, but we generally tend to show up sober.
I'd like to think journalists can hold their liquor a little better than that. But he then quickly pivoted. Once security moved the candidate, Betsy Dirksen Londrigan, he quickly pivoted to her husband and got in his face. And security the whole time is saying, "Sir, please leave."
Sure.
By the way, we obtained cell phone video of this incident. And for a journalist who's busy focusing on the politics of Governor's Day and Democrat Day, this couldn't have happened at a worse time. Because all of a sudden you got to drop that stuff and go figure out, okay, what's the police report? Who's this random guy we don't know yet? What's his name? He was in the Sangamon County Jail already. He faced charges for aggravated assault. He was arrested outside the bar. And he posted $750 cash bond the very next day and was out. In fact, I was standing in front of the bar doing a live report, and I happened to see him be dropped off at his vehicle, which he had left the day before. It was about 24 hours later. He was out of jail. So Congressman Davis fired him. The campaign fired him. He personally apologized. But Congressman Davis apologized to his opponent. But I'm told that behind closed doors, he was outraged because this just really adds fuel to the narrative.
It's an issue he doesn't need.
And by the way, candidate Dirksen Londrigan will be holding her next open town hall on Monday night and plans to say, look, this is a frightening moment. You just don't know. We're a polarized country. This district is very polarized. Some people may pose a threat, and you don't know what could have happened. Everybody was okay that night. Nobody was badly hurt. I believe at least one punch was landed. There was a bit of a scuffle, and he kept pushing up against a bouncer a lot bigger than him, trying to get back into the door. But again, fortunately, nobody was hurt. And I don't know, where does this rank in Springfield political fights? Probably not very high, but...
Well, I mean, I saw the footage, and I wonder myself, has our discourse... I mean, he was falling, instead of a 6-shooter, he's got a cell phone, up in people's face, clearly drunk, clearly out of bounds. And would this sort of thing have occurred 10 years ago, 15 years ago, before the age of cell phones, before the age of the rank political, the insults? If you hear something you don't like, you call it fake news. If it's a very polarized time we live in. Is this the sort of thing that's just a one-off? Is this the sort of thing that...
Well, it's actually very intentional. It's very organized. There is a Turning Point USA is a conservative college campus group. It's headed by Charlie Kirk. He's from Illinois, I think Wheeling. And he has a national following. But at the University of Champaign-Urbana, there's this case where these Turning Point USA students did something similar at an anti-Trump rally. There was the Antifa or anti-fascist rally where they were burning effigies of the president and all this. And so the Turning Point students showed up with cameras and cell phones in hand and tried to do something similar where they instigated the fight. But in this case, they were both sort of drunk on their own hate for the opposing party. And so it's this guerrilla style questioning that takes place in the street where you try to make your opponent look like a fool faster than you already do.
Right.
And that footage, you hope, becomes viral and,
Right.
and you make the other side look like a clown. And it's really, you've seen trolling on Twitter or on Facebook comment sections. This is trolling in real life.
Yeah.
They're taking serious issues and boiling them down to say, can I make you look stupid on camera?
Right. And then it gets weaponized, and you have an army of people online who, I mean, very well might go out and do something in real life. I mean, I know this is a much different issue, but I was just re-listening to a podcast yesterday about Pizzagate. Remember Pizzagate?
Right.
That crazy thing that happened in D.C. where right-wingers thought that Hillary Clinton's campaign manager was involved in a child porn sex ring. Obviously not.
Yeah.
But
Enabled entirely by a pizza parlor because they really weren't in the business selling pizzas. They were in the
Right,
business
right.
of helping
But
pedophiles.
someone actually went in there with a rifle and
Yeah,
fired
absolutely.
shots.
To investigate as a citizen journalist /
Yeah.
militiaman.
But like,
Yeah.
I mean, like the weaponization of these viral videos that, I mean, they're going to end up, if nowhere else, on Fox News, but very well might end up on their cable channels if it were from the other perspective. Like, and then regular people watch that and they all of a sudden think that this is what our discourse is. Like it trickles down. Like we shouldn't dismiss it out of hand as just
Sure.
some crazy thing that just like kids do online. Like it's not. It has real world implications.
Well, and the entire ideals of the Enlightenment idea is that you listen to and reason with other people and you come to a compromise or you come to an understanding at least of your opponent. And
Yeah.
in this case, we've stopped that completely and we're just yelling past each other. And so Congressman Davis is one of many who say let's have more civil discourse. Civility is important and we have to learn to listen to people even when we don't agree with them. So I think he felt like it undercut that stance he's taken when his own
Sure.
field director was caught doing this very thing that stands just 180 degrees opposite of the whole civility angle. And the reason I mentioned Turning Point, he still has a campaign staffer who was representing and writing about this incident that happened at the University of Illinois as well. So there are multiple people on Congressman Davis's staff who engage in this sort of gaslighting, inflammatory style of guerrilla combat campaign. Well, I shouldn't say combat, but guerrilla campaigning tactics.
Yeah, I mean, and there has been valuable stuff, I think, politically valuable stuff that's come about as a result of you put the trackers in the room and the candidate,
But they leave the cocktail at home.
Right. They leave the cocktail at home. The candidate slips up, believes they're in front of a sympathetic audience and says something that might not play well to the larger body politic, which is the entire reason for doing it in the first place. Do you think Mr. Lovell went to that event on his own volition, or did somebody say, you better go there?
I don't know what caused him to walk in the door. The campaign, the Davis campaign utterly denies that, but it's impossible to ignore the evidence on camera that at some point he was very intentional about what he was trying to do. I should also add, just to be fair, at least 2 police officers, one on duty, one off, thought there may have been some mental stress or duress on the young man. So I don't know exactly, and that could have been just inebriation, it could have been other extenuating circumstances. I don't know his mental state. They seem to be rather worried about his health at that time. So it was just a scary moment, and that sort of thing happens when you put a lot of people in a small space, and you know that their entire job, their entire life's goal at that time is to make sure that other person doesn't win. Campaign people live a life that runs really hot, and they have a lot of passion, and these things sometimes happen.
Could Londrigan do a turnabout here and use that footage in her own campaign to say, look, here's an example of the divisive Republicans that need to be replaced, and they act in ways that aren't civil, have no place in civil society. Could that happen? Should she consider doing it?
I mean, she could. It's definitely an option. It would be low hanging fruit, but she could also decide to take the quote unquote high road and say, like, you know what? This is a race only about issues, and we want to make sure that the people of the 13th district, like, we don't want to reduce it to this incident happened. And I mean, like, I don't know her very well. I have not followed her campaign very much, but my guess is that she would probably prefer to do the other way, to talk about issues. I mean, like, in campaign ads, like, yes, I'm sure that she will mention this. Yeah. But I don't think that she's going to make it her entire campaign.
But it would seem to be at least potentially a pretty good, or potentially a zinger that could be used in a forum or debate, calling the congressman out, as you mentioned, Mark. I mean, it has this air, I don't hold town hall meetings because this sort of thing could happen.
Well, predictions are risky business.
Fair.
But from the first steps we've seen from Betsy Dirksen-Londrigan and her husband and the campaign immediately after leads us to believe that she will probably do as Hannah said and sort of take the, she wants the public sympathy to be in her side. Sure. And I think right now it is there. She just needs to make sure that she doesn't appear to be slinging mud. So what do politicians usually do in this case? A national Democratic group will run the attack ad, and she can say, my hands are clean of it, but you still make sure that it gets all the visibility. By the way, you might not have to run campaign ads just yet. The Washington Post picked up the story. Roll Call, a national group, picked up the story. It's everywhere. So the visibility is high. I think the next few steps for her will be interesting to see how she handles it.
Could it affect at all the strategy that some of these campaigns are using in terms of sending folks to events? I mean,
if this was on purpose, it backfired royally.
Oh no! What I'm saying is what? Mind your P's and Q's. Be on. We don't want anything close to this to ever happening. I mean, could this cause any kind of a reining in of the way folks are tracked?
That's an interesting question.
I doubt it.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like campaigns use trackers because that's where they feel like they get good stuff. So I feel like they're gonna, campaigns in the state, campaigns nationally, they're gonna view this as a one-off, like, hi, make sure that your staffers don't get belligerent and then go to a private event and, ruin your surreptitious nature of what a tracker does.
That 2-minute video goes in the HR training file as evidence of things you don't do.
Yeah.
But that's about the extent of it, right? There will be a lesson taught, maybe a slap on the wrist to anybody who's been crossing that line, but campaigns everywhere are saying, behave.
Behave. And with that, we are out of time. So thanks for joining us on Capitol View, and we'll see you again next week.